to hit each other during these fights. I began to link the loud TV sound with glass breaking or a heavy object hitting the wall. I was too young to understand why my parents fought so much. I only knew I feared their fights. I cried because it was the only way to express my dread and confusion at their yelling. I only got more wrath in response for my cries for comfort or cease. They would become mad and yell at me to stop crying and be quiet. Thus I learned that expressing my thoughts was risky and that my misery and worry were undesirable at home. Therefore, I no longer felt safe with my parents. The two people who were supposed to protect me made me feel most vulnerable and afraid. They couldn't prevent themselves from harming each other, therefore I couldn't trust them. I developed coping mechanisms to avoid the chaos as I got older. I went to my bathroom, bedroom, or any other place where I could shut the door to avoid being enraged when the battle started. I hid my head under a pillow or covered my ears to block out them arguing in cramped spaces. Thankfully, my maternal grandparents took over and things improved. After years of silently watching my parents' relationship fail, I think they broke. My parents took action after witnessing how much their disagreements were hurting me. My grandparents and other concerned relatives staged an intervention when everyone worked together to solve the problem. This intervention gave my parents the option to divorce or seek marriage treatment. For the first time, I felt like someone understood how their relationship was hurting them and me. In addition to saving their marriage, the intervention spared me great turmoil. My family told me things had to change since the toxic environment was affecting my mental health. My parents reluctantly agreed to marriage therapy. Despite its gradual and unpleasant effects, we could tell the surgery was working. My parents had fewer violent, explosive disagreements and focused more on talking than insulting each other. They seemed to be learning a language of respect and understanding instead of fury and blame. Our home gradually calmed, free of the usual stress and anxiety. However, when their connection improved, I saw something that injured and confused me. It felt my parents were leaving me. Despite their lunacy, I had engaged in my daily life. My dad dropping me off at school and my mom providing breakfast showed that they still cared for me. These behaviors waned as they focused on restoring their marriage. Mom suddenly stopped getting up early and making breakfast. Dad used to say he was too busy to drive me to school, but he stopped. Instead, they gave me $20 and told me to buy lunch or take the bus. An unusual and unsettling encounter. I was relieved the fighting had abated and our house was no longer a battlefield. However, I felt fresh loneliness. Despite knowing they were going through a lot, I felt abandoned, like they had forgotten about me in their efforts to rebuild their relationship. Time increased my parents' focus on their relationship, but it seemed to hurt their relationship with me. The two of them started going out more without me. They had never done this before, leaving me at home to eat whatever leftovers in the fridge while they went out for meals or romantic nights. They also stopped asking about my grades and showing interest in my education. I remember the rare times I excitedly announced a hard-earned grade in hopes of a smile or compliment. Instead, they would ignore me and continue their conversation. As my 16th birthday approached, I wanted to celebrate with my best friends. I never got to celebrate my birthday before that year, but I never protested. But this time, I wanted a party and to feel like a typical adolescent. I had the courage to ask my parents for a birthday party. My mom advised me to stop wasting their money, but my dad refused. Her words were profound, making me feel like a burden and like I couldn't ask for anything. She said that I should figure out how to repay them for all their years of spending on me rather than want more items. As usual, I would have moved on, digested my sadness, and withdrawn. But something inside me erupted. Never before had I felt so depressed, frustrated, and enraged. Maybe my adolescent hormones or years of feeling abandoned caused it. It was my breaking point. I screamed at them since they had only given birth and never made me feel loved or cared for. I asked why they had me if they were so mad and said I didn't have to return anything. After hearing my scream, my mother, who had never touched me, hit me in the face. Her words hurt worse than her sudden touch on my cheek. She said I had no right to talk to them that way, that I was lucky they had done so much for me, and that I should be grateful for just living. Tears were appearing. I hoped my father would help, protect, or soothe me. Shaking his head, he looked forlorn. He said I needed to mature and learn proper behavior as I got older. He called me immature for clashing with them about a birthday party. I was devastated by their words. I understood my hopes and feelings were irrelevant to them. I cried myself to sleep that night, feeling more alone than ever. Days after my outburst, home tensions increased. My mother never apologized for slapping me or acknowledged the harm I caused. It felt like that night never happened. My parents seemed to shun contact these days. They never spoke to me unless it was necessary, and even then, they were cold and abrupt. 1 week later, Dad called me into the living room. I sensed an issue when I entered. He and my mother sat there looking serious and unhappy. My heart sank as I prepared for further reprimands. As I sat down to reflect about what I did this time, I felt stress growing. I couldn't look them in the eyes because I was frightened of what would happen. My dad started talking before I could react. His voice was calm. I was uneasy about a suggestion of danger. He said he and my mother thought their marriage was practically perfect and had been thinking a lot since our last conversation. He told me they worked hard to be happy together. I was astonished by his following statement when he paused. He advised them to fix one major issue before they could truly enjoy their marriage. After staring at me, my father said I caused their failure. Sitting still, I attempted to understand what he was saying. It was almost missed because he expressed it so plainly. He said they thought their marriage would be perfect if they weren't parenting me. My mother interrupted me with a sharp, resentful voice as I sat with my heart beating. She claimed that I nearly broke them up and that having me around the house reminded them how much they hated me. Since they had me as children, my dad says they had no option. No one had told the other that they hated parenting over time. He claimed that this latent enmity caused many of their arguments. After attending counseling, they both realized they had a dislike for me, their child. After that, they emotionally separated to save their marriage, but it wasn't enough. My latest disobedience was the final straw. They realized my weight on them. They wanted to live their lives without being reminded of their relationship's biggest regret. As I sat there, their words froze me, making me feel like time had stopped and everything was worthless. My parents, who had raised me and been my world, shattered all I knew about love, family, and my family, and inclusivity. As if that wasn't enough, my mother said they wanted me to move in with my grandparents soon. I would have to figure something out on my own if my grandparents didn't want to take me in, just in case, she replied softly. She seemed worried about living with a friend or alone. The cold, heartless way she spoke showed that she and my father were done with me. They had forgotten me and moved on in their minds. I peered at them, hoping to find regret or reason to reconsider. But all I saw were chilly, determined looks. Their eyes lacked sympathy and love, and they didn't resemble the parents I'd always desired. My heart fell when I learned that my parents, who were supposed to love and care for me, had decided I was expendable. I sat shocked in my room that night after this encounter. The idea that they asked me to leave the house as a juvenile still shocked me. Once they were done, they expected me to find my own path. They were done with me, parenting, and the failure they said destroyed their marriage. I couldn't think or breathe. I was incredulous that my folks were neglecting me like nothing. I was devastated. My grandparents immediately helped me after my mother told her parents to evict me. My grandmother's eyes showed fury as soon as they arrived. She was virtually trembling with anger at my parents' treatment of me. Her usually calm voice became harsh and indignant as she asked my mother how she could have done something so heartless. My dad claimed that my grandparents only kept me because of their persistence and that they never wanted me. He told them they had to house me because they were worried about me. How he characterized me, slashed me like a knife, like if I were a chore. However, my grandparents persisted. My grandfather calmly but forcefully told me to gather my important documents and pack my clothes. My eyes were weeping as I staggered back to my room. I cried uncontrollably as I frantically packed my suitcase with quivering hands. The thought of abandoning my only home tortured me. The fact that my grandparents adopted me made me feel lucky. It didn't ease my parents' rejection. While packing, I hoped my parents would wake up and realize what they were doing. I prayed they would stop me, apologize, and say they loved me and wanted me to stay. No such words appeared. When I departed, my grandparents helped me transport my stuff. My parents didn't even glance at me, although I expected resistance or remorse. They held hands at the kitchen table, ignoring me. My heart broke when I saw them seated together, united in their choice. That's when I realized my parents only cared about each other and prioritized their relationship over their child. I had some of my toughest days in the weeks after moving in with my grandparents. My parents' frightening dreams kept me up at night, drenched in sweat and crying. I lay there shivering in the dark because I couldn't get over my parents' abandonment. I also got sick often, reflecting my anguish. My grandfather worried about my health and accompanied me to the doctor. The doctor informed diplomatically that stress was affecting my mental health after multiple tests. I was getting physically weakened by my feelings. I felt myself falling more into hopelessness. I stopped caring about myself, ate sporadically, and lost interest in everything. Academic performance declined. How much I missed my parents hurt. I kept hoping they would call, apologize, and bring me back. The phone did not ring. I called them in desperate situations, thinking my voice would tell them I was alive and their child. I kept calling, but they never answered. I would tell my mom everything and beg her to come get me. Her silence reminded me how little I mattered to her, but she only left me on read. Week after week, the load increased. As I fought to comprehend that my parents had abandoned me, my heart hurt more and more every day. When she was combing my hair to comfort me and normalize my life, my grandma broke down in tears. Shakily grasping the brush, she cried aloud. She cried as she emphasized her and my grandfather's desire to see me happy again and end this. Seeing my granny cry gave me wisdom and guilt, because she couldn't help me. This person who loved me was as distressed as I was. I realized I couldn't keep letting myself fall. My parents had decided to leave and would not return. Even though it hurt, I had to accept that. At that point, I realized I had to rebuild my life for my grandparents and myself. When I had nowhere else to go, they took me in and did everything they could to help me heal. They deserved to see me struggle to start afresh. I decided to proceed day by day after that. Grief was still unbearable some days, so it wasn't easy. Missing my parents made me breathless. However, I knew I had to keep going for myself and those who still cared. I owed it to my grandparents and myself to find happiness again, since they were my lifeline. Over the months, I began to notice small, encouraging things in my life instead of the debilitating pain of losing my parents. Grandma makes my breakfast every morning. It's adorable that she spreads ketchup in a smiley face on my bread. I've never felt so cared for by a tiny gesture. My grandpa irons my school clothes every morning because he thinks a rumpled shirt shows a negative character. This makes me look professional when I go to class. I've never had the freedom of living with my grandparents. I can join extracurriculars. My parents never let me do this, but now I've met friends and joined sports teams. Now I look forward to weekends. I had never spent much time with my pals, but my grandparents insisted. Now I can relax and be a teen without being judged. Time has made me think less about my parents. Naturally, the pain persists. I'm less obsessed with it. My grandparents have created a loving, respectful, and safe environment. Eventually, their house became mine. I've been away from my parents' place 6 months. My father's and mother's relatives still visit me often. Everyone in the family was startled and enraged when my parents' actions were revealed. After challenging my parents' decision to leave me, everyone stopped talking to them. My family periodically provide facts regarding my parents' lives. I think my absence increased their closeness. They took a trip recently, enjoying their marriage's peace. Though it stung, I tried to disregard my thoughts. I hadn't spoken to my grandparents in months since I wanted to move on and focus on my new life with them. Yesterday, something unexpected happened. Look at my ringing phone screen and my heart stops. My mother called. Despite repeated attempts to rub my eyes, the phone kept ringing. I thought I was suffering a cruel mental prank. I grabbed it with a shaking hand, my heart beating. I heard her breathing on the other end initially when I responded, unsteady and uncertain. After an uncomfortable silence that seemed forever, she spoke. I forgot how soft her voice was. She reluctantly asked how I was. I couldn't answer the lingering question. How would I answer her? That I was fine? I was hurt? That despite my everyday need for them, I resented their actions. Unsure what to say, I kept quiet. She asked if I could chat again, saying she needed to discuss something important. Her cautious, nearly planned remarks made me wonder what could be so important after all this time. Why suddenly after months of silence and apparent life progress? In the months since they removed me, we had a lot of unspoken hurt. I clung to the hope that she was apologizing, but I wasn't sure I could listen. As I asked her what she wanted, I attempted to be cool despite my feelings. There was silence on the other end, and I could hear her gathering her courage to speak. My mother requested I return home after taking a deep breath. After hearing the words I had longed for months, I felt strange and hollow. She said she and her father regretted tossing me out after thinking about it. They advised me to apologize at home. Her words didn't sit well with me. She never apologized for what she and my father did to me. She read from a script, like she practiced. No true sorrow or sadness was evident. I told her I didn't trust her and thought she was lying. I said she and her father wouldn't have waited 6 months to contact her if they regretted what they did. They might have easily knocked on my grandparents' door to plead for my pardon. They had been quiet for 6 months, vacationing, enjoying life without me, and growing closer. She called me unexpectedly, assuming that a few words might fix all and undo their damage. I told her I no longer needed them and to stop manipulating my emotions. I had been trying to start over without them for 6 months after they ejected me. I wouldn't let them back in and act normally. I ended the call there. Not sure how I feel about this. Ida for not trusting my mom and returning home after she and my father expelled me. Thanks to everyone who has reached out and offered support. My mom has called me 3 more times since we last spoke, but I haven't answered. It seems too good to be true. Yet my dad wrote me a note stating he misses me and apologizing for everything. I told my grandparents about my mom's unexpected call since I'm delighted others find my parents' actions weird. My granny is asking other family members why my parents pressured me to return home. Update 2: news of the truth suggests we were fine. One of my dad's relatives confirmed that my paternal grandparents wrote a new will. As their only son, my dad is supposed to inherit everything. They included a clause to their amended will, by signature, and the money must be split evenly between my dad and me for him to inherit. If I don't sign, Charity gets the full fortune. Like everyone else, my paternal grandparents know about my parents' abandonment and keep in touch. Undoubtedly, they want to reconnect me with my parents. I now realize that my parents only contacted me because they fear losing this bequest if they don't stay in touch. To avoid objections to signing for the bequest if my paternal grandparents die, they want me to return. After that, my maternal grandparents warned my parents that we now knew why they contacted me. My mother tried to convince me to think about my future because I would benefit from the inheritance, not just my paternal grandparents' will. Her arguments didn't convince my grandma. She apologized for her cruelty and told my mother she was no longer her daughter. After that fight, I blocked my parents. My grandparents will be my home, like I've done for months. Even though my relationship with my parents may never be healed, I may learn from the experience. I'm finally among folks that care about me and want the best for me, even if it's not my life plan.